All right, welcome everybody. My name is Edith Gondwe. I am a student at Michigan State University. Today, I'm excited to be here together with Emma Rice, who led in organizing this session, as well as all of you who made time to be here today. We're going to be hearing from various people concerning their research on gender, and I'm excited that we managed to put this through for those that are in Cape Town. Hopefully that you're having a good time there, and for everybody who is joining us from elsewhere, you're very welcome to this session. So I'm going to let Emma make the initial welcoming remarks, and then we're going to jump right into it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Emma Rice. I'm also a graduate student at Michigan State University in the same lab as Edith. And it's been really a great experience organizing this session together with her. So I just want to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from around the world in different time zones. Thank you to each and every one of you for taking the time to be here with us today. We're very pleased to welcome you all to our session titled Doing Gender, Pushing the Boundaries on Gender Research in Small-Scale Fisheries. It has been an honor to assist in organizing this session on such an important topic, and I'm very excited to be able to highlight some of the fantastic research being conducted in this area and learn from all 8 of our incredible session participants today. Thanks again to everyone who's helped make this session possible and to all the attendees for being here with us today. Throughout the session, I will play 2 presentations in a row, and then we'll pause for 5 minutes of live question, answer, and discussion from the audience for each presentation. And we look forward to having a great discussion here today. So with that, I will proceed in sharing the recordings from our first 2 presenters.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Edith Gondwe, and I am excited to be here at the 4th Small World Scale Fisheries Congress. I am especially excited to talk all things gender in this session. I'm a PhD student at Michigan State University in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife. I work with a wonderful team of researchers at the Center for Systems Integration and Sustainability. Today, I'm going to be talking about a talk titled Considerations in Measuring Women's Empowerment in Food and Nutrition Security Studies. This is part of my dissertation work. It is one of the chapters in my dissertation. It is an ongoing work, and I look forward to hearing a lot of comments as well as any other ideas that you all might have. Women's empowerment is important for both the attainment of outcomes within households, such as food security and poverty, but also as an outcome that women and girls need to have. However, the measurement of women's empowerment is faced by many challenges that include the different meaning of women's empowerment in different contexts, the frequency of strategic choices, the confounding factors of social norms and gender norms, as well as the difficulties inherent in measuring a process. Nevertheless, these challenges are not exactly a bleak situation. They just offer an opportunity for researchers to conduct more fine and nuanced research, as all of us are doing here. My study is situated within the small-scale fisheries framework, which proposes women's participation in small-scale fisheries as a pathway to attaining food and nutritional status. I specifically focus on participation in decision-making as a proxy for women's empowerment and ask the question, how does women's participation in decision-making lead to food security outcomes? Realizing that women's empowerment is a difficult concept to measure, I first of all undertook a first phase of field work, which was focused on understanding what decisions the women mostly undertake in households. Are these made solely, and what are the outcomes? This field work was conducted at Lilongwe Fish Market, which is an urban fish market in Malawi. This fish market is frequented by both urban and rural fish traders. So using information from in-depth interviews, I'm going to present 2 of the many findings that I had, but for the sake of time, I'm going to focus on 2 main findings that I found that are relating to the measurement challenges of women's empowerment, what I found, and how I intend to go about it. Firstly, in terms of the decisions that women are making, I find that there is a range of dimensions within households that women are involved in. These include children's welfare, livelihood activities, and use of income. However, there is variation in terms of how exactly are they participating. In some households, women have control use of income. In some households, they have to wait for their spouses. In some households, women participate in fish trade only after having bargained with their spouses, because perhaps their spouses would assume that the women do not participate in any livelihood activities. We also see that in terms of children's welfare, women are participating in these dimensions because they believe that if they don't take a lead, children will be affected. The second thing that I wanted to mention from these findings was just the general notion of, is participation in decision-making a good indicator for women's empowerment? Overall, from the findings that I had from these in-depth interviews, I find that yes, it is a good indicator, but it has caveats. And these caveats mostly are associated of what it means to women themselves when they participate in a lot of decision makings. In other words, the intrinsic dimension of women's empowerment seems to confound these instrumental positive indicator of women's empowerment. So going forward, and with these findings and other findings which I've not been able to present of time, like I said, I propose how I'm moving forward in terms of conceptualization and measurement of women's empowerment using participation in decision-making as a proxy. Firstly, I indicate that I am still using participation in decision-making as a proxy, and I believe that it is an important dimension that still gives us insights. Nevertheless, I'm going to add a dimension of asking my respondents whether they actually prefer to participate in decision-making, and that will give me will let me to infer about what the participation in decision-making actually prefers, implies, or actually means to my respondents. Secondly, due to the challenges of measuring the process of empowerment, during the interviews, I was able to get insights about some of the factors that affect participation in decision-making. So issues about cultural norms were mentioned. So instead of measuring the process and acknowledging that it is a challenge, I'm going to focus on the factors that actually affect this process, this participation in decision-making. Thirdly, acknowledging that an increase in decision-making might actually have perceived negative outcomes on women's empowerment. I am going to use an index called Women's Participation in Decision-Making that will specifically try to identify what is the ideal level of decision-making that is associated with positive food security outcomes. Doing that, I'm going to answer these three research objectives on the slides, and I hope to be able to contribute to this question of, does women's participation in decision-making lead to better food security outcomes? I look forward to hearing from you, and these are my contact details. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Patrick Kawai Jimseu, a master's student working with the peer project team from Luana and Michigan State University. So I'll be taking you through the gender perception and the attitude of fish traders on use of digital tools in artisanal fish marketing in Malawi. So I have a question for you. What do female fish traders want in a digital world? So that's the presentation outline, and I believe we know how the fisheries sector is important at global level and the role it plays to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and the national economic goals. But understanding the gender dynamics in the fisheries sector is essential for inclusive growth, and use of the digital tools is slowly reshaping the fisheries sector. And tools like mobile phone, radio, television have proven to help in improving market efficiency and performance, which leads to a better livelihood. So we'll go straight to answering our question. What digital tools do female fish traders want? But before that, let's acknowledge recent studies by Bertley, Burstow, Bennett, and Akadingeza, which highlighted current problems in the fisheries sector, from price fluctuations that lead to destabilized livelihood and proposed digital systems that would help to solve the complicated fish markets. According to Wayne and Steinfeld, however, use of these tools they can only work if people are using them. So people's attitude and perception also influence whether the traders use or don't use the tools. So the study objective was to examine the perception and the attitude of fish traders on use of these digital tools and find the determinants of their perception and attitude. So using data from 548 fish traders from 12 markets and 12 districts in Malawi, we employed a Latin class model to examine perception and attitude. And we also used a probability regression to determine the factors that influence fish traders, female fish traders' attitude and perception. So descriptive results show that there are gender differences in education, household size, business capital experience, marital status, and the role these fish traders play. And on usage, there are also gender variation on use of messages, WhatsApp, radio, and Facebook. And on satisfaction, we also observe that gender variation on how male and female traders are satisfied with these tools. So a Latin class model provided us with a 2-class model has the best model of fit with the lowest PIC in comparison with a 3-class, 4-class, and 5-class model. So based on the class probabilities, we can classify female fish traders as digital-wise and phone-wise fish traders. But majority of these fish traders, like over 76%, are digital-wise, whereby we can see that they're in favor of many digital platforms, from calls to television. And results from probability regression show that trust, quality of information, and capital influence female fish traders' attitude on use of radio. On the other hand, marital status, trust, need for text information, and experience influence female fish traders' attitude on use of mobile phones. And lastly, quality of information, capital, type of occupation, influence traders' attitude on use of television. So in conclusion, female fish traders are not lagging behind in technological advancement. They are using different tools, and majority are highly satisfied and with these different tools that offer different services. And quality of information, experience, trust, capital, among other factors, influence female fish traders' perception and the attitude towards use of these digital tools. And we can also see that there's a positive attitude among female fish traders on use of these digital tools. So to wrap up from the study, the following recommendations can be made. There's need for different stakeholders to take initiatives in different platforms to promote access to market information to all traders based on the different likings, as we have seen heterogeneous likings. And there is a strong need for quality information and also information with regards to access to credit to satisfy female traders if they are to use digital tools. And lastly, to achieve equality in access to information, stakeholders should collaborate in providing services in diversified platforms to fill the diversified needs of different fish traders. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you to both Edith and Patrick. I will now open it up for 5 minutes of questions. Looks like Kafayat, if you want to ask your question, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Patrick, I like your presentation and I like the topic too. So I'm just curious about the study, about the demographics of the women. I assume they're all women. And because you said they like the digital wise that they've taken to the digital platforms, but are they all, do they have the same level of education or literacy? Because I know that at times such studies may be context specific or location specific, and that would affect the application elsewhere. So I'm just wondering about the literacy rate of the women or the fish traders you interviewed. How would you gauge the literacy level? Because that has a really huge impact on their ability to use the phone, either digital or the phone as it is. Thank you.
Patrick, I think you can take the question.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. From the demographics, on average, the women took almost say 8 years of their time in education, and we had majority like 51% who actually attended primary education. So from that percentage, some are not able to read and write, but use of phones like phone calls has become a tool whereby every day it's part of their everyday part of trading, that they have to make phone calls to know where exactly to get the fish, how much in terms of variation in prices. So regardless that majority have primary education, rather, which is almost not 51, but for female traders, it's about 60% that have attended primary education. So regardless of just attending primary education, they still use small phones that they are able to check prices in various lakeshore areas or markets where they source ponds and they source fish, and also they're able to get information with regards to what quality is there. So they were much interested now in having the information through digital tools, like having calls to be told exactly where the fish are and whatever information that can help them in trading. Thank you.
Thank you. And if anybody in the audience has a question, if you put it in the chat, I can read it out loud to our speakers. I'll go ahead and ask a question for Edith while we wait for the audience to provide questions. Edith, how do you distinguish between a strategic decision and then just an everyday decision? And you were talking about strategic decisions specifically as being a measurement of women's empowerment.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Definitely a great question. And again, something that is very contextual, right? So the theoretical definition of a strategic decision just alludes to the fact that that is a decision that will change the course of somebody's life. So like the course of somebody's well-being. And these are supposed to be significant decisions, but it is a blurred line, at least so far as what I've been able to sort of read into and research into. It's a blurred line, and I think it ends up now coming back to the issue that you still have to understand the context of what is a strategic decision to an individual person. So it is not something that can be generalized to everybody, but we would still have to understand it at the individual level. So I still would want to approach it, at least for my research, to have it in terms of a contextualized understanding of what do strategic decisions look like for my study population.
Great, thank you. If nobody else has questions, we will move ahead and play our next two presentations. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to the organizers for having me here. And I'm very glad for this opportunity to contribute to this conversation today, looking into gender, pushing the boundaries on gender research in small-scale fisheries. My contribution this afternoon will highlight on the challenges and opportunities for women in small-scale fisheries in Lake Victoria that have been identified with and by the women in the small-scale fisheries as part of the ongoing research as an effort to support organizational and institutional capacity of the women in the sector. This action research has been conducted by EMEDO, an organization that has been working with the fishing communities in Tanzania since its foundation in 2006, with the focus on organizational organizing and supporting transformation of fishers in small-scale fishing communities, but also particularly women in the sector. Action research was conducted, this action research was conducted as part of the project Empowering Women in Fisheries for Sustainable Food Systems that aimed at enhancing the contribution of small-scale fisheries to food security and poverty eradication, but also contributing to sustainable livelihoods in support of the implementation of the small-scale fisheries guidelines. And technically and financially was supported also by a FAO. So the focus of the action was to support the women fish processors and traders, or women fish workers in Tanzania, through their national association, which is called TAWFA, Tanzania Women Fish Workers Association, the chapter of the Lake Victoria. And this is also a member of the African Women Fish Processors and Traders Association, the AFFISHNET. So TAWFA is a platform that seeks to strengthen the women fish processors and traders and the overall fish workers in the country, strengthening their position and contribution to the national and regional agenda of ending hunger, both contributing at the African level, having poverty by the 2025, given their key role as active players in the sector, in line with the existing national, regional, and global instruments, policies, and strategies. So among the objectives of TAWFA include improving the prosperity, working conditions, and income of women in the sector, especially in the post-harvest section, while contributing to the reversal of adverse effects on environment, by fisheries activities along the value chain. So looking at the larger picture, ensuring women's participation and paying more attention to harvest practices would bring benefits, contributing to more sustainable fisheries management and resource utilization by capitalizing on women knowledge of the value chain, by introducing practices, reducing post-harvest losses, and more the environmentally friendly processing techniques. This would contribute to safeguarding biodiversity and more resilient ecosystems by reducing the pressure on the fishery and other resources. 2022 being an international year for artisanal fisheries and aquaculture, IAFA, the action was also used to raise awareness on the year on IAFA, which is based on the recognition of the fundamental role of small-scale artisanal fisheries and aquaculture in terms of livelihoods, food security, nutrition, and the urgent need to take specific actions in supporting the sector. So women fish workers as important actors in the small-scale fisheries sector should be informed and be supported to understand IAFA. So what we did was also to ask, what does IAFA mean to them? And therefore, develop and implement activities that would contribute to the IAFA Global Plan of Action. So all this process also was contributing towards that process, whereby by identifying challenges and opportunities, is informing them to develop strategies and interventions that will be able to address the challenges that they are facing. So what exactly did we do? As part of the methodology, we facilitated a process whereby women had consultations between and among themselves, but also with the technical staff of the government at the district and regional level, but also at the zonal level, because the Lake Victoria fishery is divided into 5 geographical regions. So all these were also observed. And we mostly used as a methodology focus group discussions, key informant interviews, question and answers to collect all the information that we've gathered in this process. And in a period of 9 months, we conducted a total of more than 14 consultation meetings. So we had 14 district level consultations, 5 regional consultations, and 1 zonal level consultation. So in each of these consultations, we were able to meet the district, executive director, commissioners, fisheries officers, community development officers, but also at the regional level, we met similar officials, but now at a more higher level at the regional level. But within all these processes, women were key and we are at the center of it all. So in each district, we were able to meet with representatives from 10 identified groups that were collaboratively identified by the fisheries officers, community development officers through their registration documents, but also we worked with them together on that. Yeah, so fast forward, the outcome of this process that involved a total of 14 districts, 5 regions, and within the region, that involved a total of 140 women fish workers groups, representing more than 3,000 women, were able to come up with a lot of information that includes prioritization of the challenges that they identified that helped them to develop district action plans, a process that was done in a very collaborative process. Likewise, at the regional level, so all those districts congregated at the regional level, they shared and they developed a regional action plan, a regional level action plan. So these action plans were developed at all these levels in a consultative process, very collaborative process, and also identified who will be responsible, at different levels, especially from the government offices, so that when the women follow up, they would know who will be responding to them, whom should they be meeting. So at the same time, they were able to elect their leaders. The women were able to elect their leaders at the district and at the regional level, but also at the zonal level. So at the zonal level, they had the coordination committee formed representing all the regions, but also the executive committee, which is the top kind of executive body at the regional, at the zonal level. And some of the highlighted issues, because there are a whole list of issues, some of them have already started working on them so that they should be addressed because of the urgency. One being the change of the procedures for the women to access loans, from the district. The current requirement is that it requires the women to access, to follow the process digitally, something that is going to marginalize the women even further, because as of now, women in fisheries they are the last to access, because of their situation. Most of them are remotely located, and also, their engagement activities are somehow not allowing them to go into the districts and do that, especially for those who are based in the islands. Yeah, so other areas include gender-based violence that has also been identified, especially in the landing sites, access to fisheries resources for women, but also for men, because it is increasingly becoming a challenge coupled with the climate change and scarcity of fish, which is also a result of both the changing climate conditions and illegal fishing practices. And to conclude, I would like to say that this work is in progress, as I've already mentioned, and I'll be happy to share the outcomes once the process is concluded. And I would like to make an appeal that it's not just today, yesterday, and the day before we are hearing about problems, challenges, difficulties that are facing women and men in the sector. In principle, challenges are known already. So what we need now is action. How can all the relevant actors support women to be able to transform their situation, and realize results, and be able to see their desired situation in their own lives? So women are now already organized. It is high time to enable the women's institutions to function by giving them funds, technical support, exposure, facilitating learning visits, etc., so that they are able to transform their situations. And this is possible if all actors commit to implement the small-scale fisheries guidelines in the right way. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I again thank the organizers for inviting me in this conversation. Thank you.
Hi viewers, my name is Neema Folake Oshabdugafar. I'll be talking on assessments of gendered poverty and food insecurity in 2 fishing communities in Lagos State, Nigeria. Here is the table of contents, from introduction to methods, results, conclusions, and recommendations. Food is a basic and essential life need and a fundamental human right. Women earn poor income but spend more on household upkeep. Gender roles have social categories and they determine power and status in local communities. At the household level, social norms, values, practices, and livelihood capital assets collectively influence gender roles and responsibilities among different reproductive and productive tasks. Nigeria is a signatory to different policies guiding agriculture and promoting gender inclusion to support SDG goals and eradicate poverty, but these policies are faced with strong cultural forces. In fisheries contests, women in fisheries are active players, but they are often underpaid in the workforce. This could be counteractive to sustainable development in decreasing poverty and food insecurity, and it can cause slow progress in gender mainstream despite intentional consideration. This research is an attempt to understand gender perception about food insecurity and poverty, and to also determine how gender division of roles and responsibilities control productive resources and also impact social stability. We chose Ekpe and Badagry because they are both coastal communities. The research is a focus group discussion with a minimum of 6 members per group. We discussed in Yoruba language, then transcribed to English for further analysis. This research was conducted as a preliminary study in 2017. For the methods, we used the Harvard Analytical Framework to bring visibility to women labor and to process the inequalities they face in assessing and controlling resources. The social relation approach took into account the multiple identities men and women face in their respective life and also to the wider network. We also looked at food insecurity and poverty based on individual and community levels. Here is the general demographics. Some men have tertiary education, while some women did not go to school at all. They are majorly in their 50s with different household and marriage structures. They majorly fish but also get involved in selling utilities and petty trades. Here is our result. For food security, fish is a basic source of nutrition, and the households are generally food secured, except during fish scarcity or lean fish seasons. Women roles were primarily domiciled to their home and communities. The fish trading business and processing services are not indicators of wealth because they require little capital to start. In fact, women engage in other small-scale businesses to support themselves and their families. This and some other social factors constrain them from having their own assets. Cultural factor also limited their access to fishing grounds. In fact, in Ashikwa local community, they are deprived from making decisions or taking control over their earnings. Fortunately, women who have both access and access to fishing ground resources attain the community standard of a wealthy person. Generally, life was perceived as worse than in the last 10 years. To live well in the community, self-help groups, modern electricities, boreholes to provide potable water, modern public toilets, and cold rooms were identified as very essential. On fisheries level, poor fish catch in nearshore have reduced their earnings. Fishers traveled long distance from shore to get meaningful catch. Fishers also press for more state support in the supply of fishing nets and onboard engine of more than 40 horsepower. Collectively, fishers opine that a turnaround from the present state of livelihood is possible when a positive change in fish abundance occurs to prevent the fishery from total collapse. Also, post-harvest losses during peak seasons are due to inadequate and subpar fish smoking technologies. The market system is informal and weak. They lack structures to preserve and store their products, consequently leaving them at the vagaries of fluctuations in fishery and unfavorable market prices. In conclusion, women's contribution to household upkeep has increased despite decline in sales. Gender inequality in decision-making, asset ownership reinforces poverty on women. Before the implementation of policies, we encourage understanding gender, cultural, and power structures. We also encourage that policymakers should avoid blending general gender issues with women-specific issues in policy interventions. We need to encourage inclusion in policy and interventions and also build community soft skills. These are our references. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation.
All right, thank you very much to both of those presenters. Do we have any questions from any of our other participants or from the audience for Cafayat? Okay, I have one. So at the end there was a recommendation that suggested we need to avoid blending women's issues with gender issues. Could you elaborate on that? Because those two terms are often conflated and it's very difficult to communicate that. Could you just elaborate on how we can avoid that? And secondly, you also talked about one of the main issues being women's lack of access to credit facilities. And I think this is a common theme we've already seen in one of the earlier presentations and that we've also found in my research. So I was just personally curious what your suggestions are on how to address that.
Thank you, Emma. First of all, with respect to your question on women issues gender issues. There's a distinction between women and gender, and gender is not just looking at the women, they're also looking at the other gender. And then you're looking at the whole makeup of what makes a gender, not just the biological sex. You're looking at ethnicity, you're looking at the identity, you're looking at the religion, the customs, the social status, the economic status, everything that makes up that person, is gender. Because frequently, what the type of intervention that has come to the women, it has been the one that has kept them in that level, as they are fish processors, they are traders, and this is what we give them. We give them the smoking kiln. That is what they need. They don't, not all of them need that. And by the way, we had the research. We had the research recently, and from the field work we did, she was also part of the research. We discovered that the smoking kiln the government gives to the communities, the group of women in some communities, were not even used. And basically, the government thinks they need modern fish smoking kiln or oven. Let us give it to them. They give it to them without asking them what they need, and it goes to waste. So gender issues are beyond looking at I'm a woman. It goes, it's about the whole identity. The intersectionality is involved in the makeup of the woman or the man. So it's not, there has to be a better understanding of what gender issues are, rather than from what women issues are, because that will make it all, I would like to say, all encompassing. And then to the second question, yes, a lack of credit facilities is a problem, not only to the small-scale fishery sector, it is a general problem also to other sectors, people working in other informal sectors. Now, but there's one strong advantage that the small-scale fisher folks have. They have what we call social capital. And so many of them have built their businesses based on social capital. And it has formed a strong network. It has formed a strong foundation. And I always look at the policies our people in government bring to this informal sector. Why not build it on the foundation of the social capital? They've used social capital to encourage savings and thrift societies, savings and thrift societies that are local, that are traditional based, that have been thriving for years. And these have worked. Of course, we know that one of the drawbacks of these thrift or saving societies is that they have very small amounts of cash to loan or to give out as credit, but they've been working, and these people understand the way they work. So why not build the foundation of try to scale up such traditional or local means of savings, among these people? This is the only way to go. I don't believe in the formal system being a rescuer of the fisher folks, because they do not have the same priorities. They do not see the things the same way. So I think the only way to go is to make something appropriate for them, for their own context, and not to impose something that will never work in their favor.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope it's clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. We also have a question for you from one of our attendees that they wrote in the chat here. They say, this presentation reinforces that gender dimensions of small-scale fisheries are complex and context-specific. What are some strategies that researchers and practitioners should take to understand context?
This is where we go back to intersectionality. Mm-hmm. And then you have to make sure that whatever you carry out a study, you don't generalize the findings. It has to be location-specific. Otherwise, you cannot use the recommendation from one study and use it to solve another location's problem. It could cause chaos, particularly when the demographics are not the same, when the people are not the same, when the cultural factors are not the same. So everything, because all such things, problems are often specific to a location or to some people, then you must look at what makes up the entire people. What are the different factors that make up the entire people? And that is how you understand them, and that is how you're able to bring the solutions to them.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next presentations just for the sake of time. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Emma Rice. I'm a master's student at Michigan State University working with Dr. Abigail Bennett. And today I'll be talking about some of my thesis research on gender dynamics in the midstream fish value chains in Malawi. So for this study, we were interested in the livelihood outcomes of Usipa traders. And Usipa is a small pelagic lake sardine native to Lake Malawi that is incredibly micronutrient rich. So our first research question was, do livelihood benefits differ between men and women in small-scale Usipa trade in Malawi? And then secondly, if so, what are the factors driving that variation? So to answer these questions, we employed a mixed methods research approach using quantitative market survey data. The market survey data surveyed 604 retailers, which revealed that there is nearly equal participation in the Usipa trade between genders, with 55% male and 45% female. So second, we used qualitative focus group data with male-only and female-only focus groups. And we did homogeneous composition to help participants feel more comfortable answering honestly to some of these questions regarding sensitive topics about gender dynamics in the workplace. So a sneak peek here at our overall findings were quantitatively that women earn less money than men, and then qualitatively that women and men talk about the factors that influence their earnings differently. So to provide more detail on our quantitative results, we found that when looking at per unit marketing margins, female traders earn less money than male traders, and just using a t-test, we found that this difference is statistically significant. Then using an OLS regression, we found that the female dummy variable also has a negative and statistically significant impact on marketing margins. We then broke this exact same model down into our male-only traders and our female-only traders. And from our male model, we found that all of our other relevant explanatory variables that were significant in our pooled model were also significant in the male model, but then became insignificant in the female model. And so what this is telling us is that the factors that are driving and shaping marketing margins are different for men and women. So not only do marketing margins differ between men and women, also the factors that shape those margins differ. So to build on this qualitatively and add some nuance, we use the gendered value chain framework approach to our focus group questions. So we explored all 5 of these components, but for the sake of time today, we will zoom in first on performance, which studies how economic benefits are distributed between different groups of people, in this case, men and women. And secondly, on constraints, so that we can look at the barriers to success identified by both men and women in Usipa trade to help determine potential interventions. So looking qualitatively at performance, interestingly, we found in our male-only focus groups this dominant discourse that gender does not matter. And so a quote here is that there is no difference between male and female traders. We all work hard in ordering and selling to customers. It all depends on the amount of capital and one's hard working at the business. However, when we look at the results of qualitative data from our female-only focus groups, we found the opposite dominant discourse that actually gender does impact economic outcomes, and this also is what we found quantitatively. So women told us that men do better in business normally just because they have more capital than women. Us women also have more responsibilities. So this disconnect here I thought was very important to highlight. Further, we found 5 constraints that were identified from our focus group as barriers to success in the business for both men and women. So first, the first constraint identified was access to capital. Second was access to transportation. Third was access to storage. Fourth was price volatility. And fifth was fish for sex trade. Now this one is highlighted in a box here because this was the only constraint that was discussed only by our female focus groups, whereas the other 4 were discussed by both our male and female focus groups. So this challenge was important to highlight when discussing gender dynamics in the fish trade because, as one of our women focus groups told us, the fishermen sometimes bribe us. They want us to be intimate with them in order for them to sell us anything. If we say no, then they do not sell us. So our conclusion here is in 3 main points. First, that there is in fact a statistically significant difference in marketing margins between male and female OCEPA traders and the factors that drive these margins. Second is there is this concerning discourse among men still that gender does not impact economic benefits. And then third, the primary constraints for all fish traders, which manifest differently for men and women, are lack of access to capital, poor transportation, price volatility, lack of storage, and fish for sex trade. So our key take-home message here today is that although we see increasing equality and participation between genders in OCEPA trade, we found that this does not necessarily translate to equity in livelihood outcomes between genders. So with that, I want to say thank you to Michigan State University, our colleagues at LUANAR, and the Alliance for African Partnership for funding this research. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ayodele Oloko from Lagos, Nigeria. I'm presenting this wonderful chapter, Institutional Constraint to Livelihood Security, a case study of women fisherfolk from Makoko, Lagos State, Nigeria, with Dr. Sarah Harper, Dr. Kafayat, and Lolade Akingbade. With little or no institutional support, the small-scale fishery plays an important role in securing livelihood for thousands of women fisherfolk in Lagos State, Nigeria. The effort of women fisherfolk in Makoko, Lagos State, Nigeria are not valued and not recognized because they are considered as minority. Most of their domestic roles as housewives, as caregivers in Lagos State, Nigeria are not recognized. And even their productive roles as fisherwomen, fishmonger, fish processor are also not valued. There is an enormous need to study the institutional constraint of women fisherfolk to avert poverty in Lagos State, Nigeria. Because according to research, women are the poorest in developing countries. So when we're talking about the institutional constraint, we're talking about their livelihood development. We're also talking about their sustainability. An institutional constraint in this study include the absence of appropriate structures, extension services, finance, and non-implementations of relevant policy. The research objective: to improve the understanding of fishery-dependent livelihood towards the various institutional factors and constraints that affect the sustainable livelihood, and to also identify appropriate solutions to relieve their constraint. This is the study area. The study area is located in Makoko, Lagos State, Nigeria, Shijiri Fish Market, within the Lagos Lagoon. Methodology: the study was informed by secondary data analysis, literature reviews, and case study description following Oloko et al. 2022. And this is a theoretical framework. And what does this insinuate? There is a relationship between the vulnerability and livelihood options. That is the social capital, the natural capital, the woman capital, the physical capital, and the institutional policy. The institutional policy, the culture, the law, and the livelihood outcomes. What does this insinuate? It means that if the vulnerability is well tackled, They have more social capital, for example. The institutional structure, the institutional environment is favorable to women fisher folk. What does this turn? Then it turns to more increased well-being and favorable livelihood. We got this diagram again. The domestic and institutional constraint. And while we're linking the domestic and institutional constraint together, we're linking the domestic and institutional constraint because with more efforts towards the domestic vulnerability, and when the institutional constraints are being tackled, like I said earlier, it leads to increased livelihood sustainability. For example, now we got the cultural environment. Within the cultural environment, we got the family roles, we got their performance, and we got their productive roles. For example, let's take a look at this. If the cultural environment is favorable, we're going to have increased productivity. And if the institutional environment, the institutional policy is well taken care of, and this is going to lead to more economic outputs, economic sustainability, and more livelihood. And when we're talking about institutional constraint, we can say the vulnerability, context, the seasonality, the fire, and the conflicts. Then we got the major constraint, institutional constraint, to livelihood security and strategic adaptation of women in Makoko fishing community. The first constraint we have in Lagos State, Nigeria, is lack of electricity. We know that fish is a perishable commodity. So without electricity to preserve this perishable commodity, we're going to have a large amount of fish that is going to be wasted because it's not well preserved. And how do they respond to this? Use of rechargeable lamps and electricity generating sets. But the question is that how many people can afford electricity generation sets in Lagos in Nigeria? According to my research, the challenges and prospects of women fisher folk in Lagos in Nigeria, only 10% of the women can afford electricity generating sets. And what does it mean? It means that most of the fish are going to be sold on credit, or most of the fishes are going to be wasted. We're going to have high post-harvest loss. Lack of formal credit facility. In Lagos State, Nigeria, most of those women are not educated, so they don't have access to bank because they are, number one, they won't be given the money, they don't have collateral, they can read, they can write, so they don't have access to credit facility. How do they solve this? By borrowing money from relative friends and local savers, the Alajo. I really wrote about the Alajo saving group in my paper to challenges and constraint of women fisher folk in Lagos State, Nigeria. We have number 3, as a result of lack of electricity, high proportion of fish have been sold on credits because there's no way to preserve the fish. So when they get the fish from the fishermen or the fisherwoman, when they come back, they sell the fish on credit because they sell the fish on credit. And how do they combat this? How do they respond to selling their fish on credit? Effective social relation with customers based on trust. It means that for me to give you my fish, for me to give you my fish, then I have to trust you. And there's just something they use social relationship, they use social capital. They've known themselves for years. They've been selling the fish for years because they know that the fish is highly perishable. With lack of electricity, most of those fishes, like 85% of their catches, are being sold on credits. And post-harvest loss due to lack of cold storage facilities. I said that earlier. And what do they do to preserve those fish, to increase the shelf life? Utilization of old freezer boxes with highs. So most of the most of the freezers that are spoiled are being embedded with ice, and the fishes have been preserved there. But we want to ask ourselves the question, can it be preserved for 2 days? Can it be preserved for 4 days? Can it be preserved with 5 days? No. So for we to get an attainable livelihood, for livelihood to be sustained, we need to help those women. We need to speak with our government. We need to talk to Lagos State government to help those women with increased power, with increased electricity. Most fishing community, most of the fish markets should have a constant, should have a very powerful generation set where those fishes will be stored for increased storage. Because when you sell most of those fish, you get money and most of the livelihood will be attained. We have this again, insufficient transportation. Increased price of fish to compensate high transport costs. There is an insufficient transportation in Lagos in Nigeria, and it has been expensive. The cost of transporting fish from one fishing community to another fishing community is very, very expensive. So the price of the fish has been increased. And what does this insinuate? It insinuates that most women, most people in Lagos State, Nigeria, will not be able to eat fish. The fishes are going to be sold to rich people. And lack of NGO and price extension services. How do they do this? Strengthening the capacity of female leadership. I want to talk more about this. Most of the extension services in Lagos State, Nigeria are being tailored towards fishermen. We got little extension officers that have been tailored to women fisherfolk, that have been tailored to their constraints, that have been tailored to their need. And according to my research, from what I found out on the field, most women would not talk to male extension workers because, number one, they're scared. They are more relaxed. And it is more convenient for them to talk to women extension workers than they're talking to male extension workers. And apart from that, most of those women cannot read or write. They cannot read. So we need more extension services. We need more programs that have been constructed in the traditional language so that information can be disseminated. We also need illustrations, because in a situation where they can read, we need illustration to educate the women on how to preserve the fish, on how to sell their fish, on how to market their fish for increased sustainable livelihood. Now my conclusion. Attention should be devoted to underlying the causes of institutional poverty and gender vulnerability. So what is the cause of this institutional poverty? In the economic domain, in the cultural domain, in the domestic domain. An ethical consideration of fishing community during implementation of development projects. How do we help those women when we cannot even get them? Most of this provision by the government, most of this development initiative are being tailored outside coastal communities. So how do we help those women when they are not accessible? So we are pleading with the Lagos State government that most of the implementation development should be tailored toward assessing coastal communities where we can get those women fisherfolk. And from all of us, thank you so much for your attention.
Wonderful, very interesting presentations, and I'm so excited just seeing the general patterns since we have started listening to these presentations, issues about capital in different contexts, issues about what is gender, what should we understand by gender and women. So I welcome you all to raise a hand if you have a question, write it in the chat box. But I'm going to start off by asking Emma. So you had you indicated in your final slides as well as in your results, talking about how men did not respond that gender was a problem. So I just wanted to ask you, what is your hypothesis or what is your understanding about this research? Do we need men to acknowledge that there are gendered issues in fisheries, and what could that potentially help us? And I wanted in your response to take into account what Fakuya was talking about the distinction between women and gender and how that shouldn't be conflated. So I appreciate your insights into that.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Edith. I think that it is very important for men to be able to acknowledge the challenges that women face in fish trade, and more broadly than that as well. And I think that men need to be a part of the solution. So the fact that they weren't even recognizing that these challenges existed was a problem, because they're benefiting from these challenges that women face. And it is, I think, in fisheries and in development more broadly, to have men on board with addressing challenges that women face, it improves the whole sector. And I think that that's really important. And that's why I'm very excited that today we have 3 of our speakers are men, because I think that's really important that men care about these issues as well. And they will be a very important part of these solutions. And yeah, I think that is a key distinction there, that we're not focusing just on women, right? Like, we need both men and women to address these gender challenges.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I think there is a question in the Q&A. So the question is, where do you see ways of people supporting more the women? Where do you see more action or hope in moving forward the women agenda and fisheries? So maybe that can be taken up by Ayodele. So I think it is just a general question with the findings that you had, like, where do you think the support should go for women? And I think it goes back also to what was mentioned in Edith's presentation about that we know the challenges that are there. So what exactly should we be focusing on right now? So Ayodele, if you could take that question up. Did we lose you?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we should be focusing on the institutional constraint now, because we got a lot of potential in our women in Lagos State, Nigeria, but we got so many institutional constraints limiting the opportunities. For example, the first major institutional constraint is that, number one, our roads are bad. So when you go and collect your fish from the market, from the fishermen, and you don't have the means to transport the fishes to the fishing markets, then it means that all your effort have been wasted. So now we're talking to the government, we're talking to the people in charge to help those women in realizing their potential by, number one, dealing with most of the institutional constraints, building more roads. Because when we have a efficient transportation system, we could transport our fish from the fish markets, from the coastal communities where you get the fish to various fish markets in Lagos State, Nigeria. And we also have this communication. Now we have the disparity between the rich fisherwomen and the poor fish seller, because most of the rich fisherwomen, they got subordinates under them. Even if you're not educated, they got people telling them, okay, you can get the fish from, this is where you can get the fish. And most of this information are being communicated. But what about those people that can read and write? Those people that cannot even operate their phones, how would they have the privilege to also sell their fish? And when we're looking at this, we're looking at sustainable livelihood. It encapsulates everybody in Lagos State, Nigeria. So we're kind of maybe telling the government, we're begging the government, the Lagos State government, to help on our communication system. Maybe that should be like the other speakers spoke about phone calls, that most of those women, majority of those women, even when they can read and write, they cannot use phone in communicating their fisheries activities. But some fisher folks in Lagos State, Nigeria cannot even afford to get a phone, because when you want to buy a phone in Lagos State, Nigeria, the cheapest phone you can buy now is like 6,000 naira.
Oh, okay.
But some people cannot. Some people
Ayodele,
cannot
I'm
even
going to have
afford.
to cut you. Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you just for the sake of time. But yeah, thank you very much for that response and for those insights. Also, if you could take the time to type out the response in the Q&A, just for the general, just to summarize what you have said in the Q&A for the audience. We are about to jump into our final two presentations, but I just wanted to give Edith an opportunity. You are not here when your presentation was played. We had one question from your presentation, just to say very quickly a little bit about your findings about the access to loans, mostly because I think in most of the findings in Emma's presentation, in Kafayat's presentation, as well as in Patrick's presentation, we have seen these issues about access to capital coming up, and also understanding how women are organizing themselves around this. So just more broadly thinking, like, what should we be looking at? How should we be thinking about issues about challenges to access to capital, and how women are generally organizing themselves right now? So if you could quickly say something about that, Edith.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I came in late because of the challenges in connection.
Yeah, it's okay.
So thank you. So the access to loan and what is happening here, the case that I gave for the Lake Victoria region, in the 5 regions, in the 14 districts that we worked on, the experience is that, primarily women in the fishing communities have been marginalized already into accessing the loans based on their localities, the locations, especially those who are remotely located in the islands. So now that the formalities are changing, the accessibility is changing, that everyone should be able to access the loans through digital means, I say that it is increasingly continuing to pushing the women in fisheries out of the system, because regardless of the preoccupation of the women, all of them are put together to access following the same conditions. So women in the sector, in the fisheries sector, are significantly affected by this. And therefore, what is being done is that, number one, before engaging into or venturing into such kind of new methodologies of supporting the people, they should be consulted first. And assessment should have been done from the beginning, to what extent the previous methodology has supported the women in the small-scale fisheries to access. And therefore, the lessons should have been taken on board and to inform the current approaches that are being developed. But this one now, using the digital technology, as it was mentioned by the previous speaker, that even access to mobile phones itself is a challenge. And even when some of them who have access to network is a challenge, because in most cases they are in the islands where no communication, no access to internet, and therefore at the end of the day, continuously they'll be pushed out of the system completely.
Wonderful. All right.
Yeah.
All right. No, thank you so very much for that. So yeah, please, let's now listen to the final 2 presentations, and we should have a summary up. I think we're still going up to 10:45, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, and the entire conference. My name is Patrick Asango Okanga from St. Paul's University, Kenya. I'm looking forward to present to you this idea, focusing on pushing the boundaries on gender research in small-scale fisheries, the polycentric leadership in advancing gender equity in small-scale fisheries. Now, small-scale fisheries brings together diverse, dynamic activities along small-scale fisheries value chain. Traditionally, it actually brings on board activities that ranges from low technology, low capital fishing methods within the inland and ocean waters. It incorporates activities such as boat building and repairs, net making, repairs, and the post-harvest activities that looks into small-scale fishing in which sales, processing, and marketing takes place. Now, these activities are both by men and women fishers. On this basis, the fishing is seen as a way of life, as it is manifested in the traditional small-scale communities. Now, small-scale fisheries, or the fisheries catch, contribute more than half of all fish harvested in developing economies, where between 90 to 95% of the local landing are for local consumption, making a larger contribution to food security and nutrition. Small-scale fisheries employ more than 90% of workers in the fish capture industry, and 45% of the workers are women. Indeed, it is estimated that more than 45 million women participate in small-scale fisheries. Thus, almost 4 out of 10 people in small-scale fisheries are women. In terms of activities along the fisheries value and supply chain, about 15% of women actively participate in the pre-harvesting, which includes gear fabrication, repairs, while 19% of women are active in the commercial harvest. And finally, more than 50% of women are engaged actively in the post-harvest labor-intensive value addition. This includes processing, transportation, marketing, and sales. Further, women account for 45% of those engaged in small-scale fisheries for subsistence. Thus, gender equity in the sector remains instrumental if sustainable small-scale fisheries is to be realized. Now, despite the significant role that women play in the sector, gender inequality, unfairness, and injustice dominate small-scale fisheries. The predominant voices headed by male fishers negatively impact women's benefit, denying them access and control over fisheries assets, and limiting their knowledge and ability to participate in productive activities and decision-making. It is on record that men often dictate and influence activities and decisions. Furthermore, the contribution of women in the sector is not adequately recognized and duly compensated, given the male-dominant voices. Conditions under which women work in the small-scale fisheries threaten their health. The situation is even worse with indigenous women who are subjected to gender-based discrimination, compounded by ethnic-based and business discrimination, occasionally intensified by sex for fish practices. In the foregoing situation, the need for gender equity is not debatable, but an aspect whose roadmap must be searched for. Furthermore, gender equity is a key variable in understanding and enacting changes to social and cultural systems that disseminate well-being between men and women. And on this account, drivers towards gender equity in small-scale fisheries dimension, more so in developing environment of inland waters such as Lake Victoria, requires critical navigation. Probably, polycentric leadership could be one of the approaches to advancing gender equity in small-scale fisheries in the inland waters of Lake Victoria in Kenya. Polycentricity is a fundamental concept associated with the works of Vincent and Eleanor Austin. It denotes a complex form of leadership structure with multiple centers of decision-making, where each center of decision-making operates with some degree of autonomy. However, there is a need for collaboration among these semi-autonomous centers of leadership to harmonize decisions from each center and enforce commonly acceptable resolution. In the context of SSF, women and men dominate activities at different levels of activities along the fish value chain. Accordingly, if at the pre-harvesting or the post-harvesting center, women's and men's leadership should prevail by incorporating gender equity. The challenges affecting gender equity will be discussed at each center and agreed upon. Ultimately, collaborating body, bringing together leaders from different centers and levels along the value chain will incorporate all diverse concerns affecting gender equity. Thus, a common policy resolution and implementation mechanism could be realized. In addition, it is possible to strengthen capacity and enforce policies supporting gender equity through the leadership of diverse centers along the fish value chain. Each center of activity should be or could operate with independent, unique challenges with semi-autonomous individuals whose mindset and activities are unique. There is need to rethink polycentric leadership as a mechanism to advance gender equity in small-scale fisheries along the fish value chain. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ernest Obengchukwu from the Center for Coastal Management, Africa Center of Excellence in Coastal Resilience, and I am presenting on a participatory regional assessment of women shelf fisheries in West Africa. Now, this project was funded by the USAID and led by the University of Rhode Island in partnership with the University of Cape Coast and 4 other partners. To start with, we wanted to better understand the scale and scope of shell fisheries in West Africa in general. And to achieve this, we conducted participatory assessments of these shell fisheries in 11 countries in West Africa, right from Senegal to the west, down to Nigeria to the east. To do this, we had consultative meetings and interviews with resource users, government, academia, NGOs, and local community authorities. Now, the approach was to use a very deliberate gender focus on a neglected small-scale capture fishery. The results from this study have been published, and you can find it on Frontiers in Marine Science, and the title was Spotlighting Women-Led Fisheries Livelihood Towards Sustainable Coastal Governance, the Estuarine and Mangrove Ecosystem Shell Fisheries of West Africa. Now, the results of this study were quite intriguing, such that to our surprise, we actually found a very wide expanse and scatter of women shell fisheries all across the coast of West Africa. In each country that we assessed, there were at least 4 shell fishing areas in that country. From what we found, Ghana was the most highest shell fishing country with the most locations for shell fishing. Gambia was another, Senegal also. From the data we have, we anticipate that Nigeria is possible to have also a lot more shell fishing areas, which leaves room for more research into the future. Now, the important areas that we found for this shell fishing were the Salum Delta, the Tambi wetlands in Gambia, and the Densu Delta in Ghana. Across the region, we found that those engaged in shell fishing in estuarine and mangrove areas were made up of 79% of women, and in each country, at least 60% of those doing shell fishing in estuarine and mangrove areas were women. Now, the types of species that we found were mostly the bivalves, the gastropods, and some crustaceans, and as well as cephalopods. So as you can see on the screen, the Crassostra tulipa was the most ubiquitous, and it was the most harvested by women in these shell fishing areas, and that is the oyster, mangrove oyster. And these are some of the species that we found: the mangrove oysters, bloody cockles, the periwinkle, whelks, razor clam, freshwater clams, shrimps, and also the brown mussel. Across the region, the finding was that women were the most dominant shell fishing group among the bivalves and gastropod shell fisheries, which means that they cut across the entire value chain: harvesting, processing, marketing, and transportation. However, for the crustacean cephalopods, you find that women maintain their traditional roles as processors and marketing, whilst men control the harvesting and transportation. Now, interesting results that were found were that about 1.5 million hectares of mangrove areas are available potentially for shell fishing. Also, 55,000 plus estuarine and mangrove ecosystem-based shellfish harvesters were found to be present along the coast in all of these 11 countries. And 79% of these were women, as I've mentioned earlier, and 570,000 plus household beneficiaries were estimated to benefit from shell fisheries. Also, 300,000 plus metric tons of shellfish are estimated to be harvested by these women on an annual basis. This sums up or is estimated to be valued at about $300 million per annum. And this shows the scale of the activity that is ongoing. Now, to finalize my presentation, using a gender lens in such a research of small-scale fishery helped us highlight the important role women play in such a shell fishery, which is a small-scale shell fishery that has been neglected for a long time. So the proposal is that in analyzing shell fisheries or in analyzing capture fisheries in general, we encourage that fisheries officers, academia, and NGOs, and all who matter apply a gendered approach, and that could help us further elicit more information on how important women's roles are in such fisheries across Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ernest, and in absentia, Patrick, for these presentations. We are 4 minutes away from the end of our session. It could have been nice if we had more time, but this is the time that we were allocated. So quickly, could we quickly get any reactions, especially Ernest is around? Any questions, comments on Ernest's presentation?
Oh, yes, Thank you, Ernest. I've read the paper and I find it very, very interesting. I've always thought that the gleaners, are about the most neglected, fish workers. Now, I'm just intrigued because I know that Nigeria forms the largest share of the shellfish harvesters. But what's the scope of work have you done in Nigeria compared to the other countries? And what are your future plans? Because I'm interested. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Let me put this. Yes, as you rightly mentioned, in fact, during this study, we had to partner with researchers from all of the 11 countries that we had assessments in. And Nigeria, yes, we had a partner there as well. What we did was to visit some of the states. In fact, the limitation for Nigeria was that the coast is very long and big. We did not have all the resources to have a very detailed. So in fact, this study that we did, despite the scale that we found, we still believe that it's quite a snapshot, and we look forward to future more detailed and more focused studies in each country. And we are still having this project that we are currently running, but with a different focus now. But the plan is that into the future, work more towards having more detailed studies. And also the encouragement is for countries themselves and national institutions, fisheries institutions, to take interest in this, because we have done the first step of the work of highlighting what the importance of women's shell fisheries are. So the encouragement is for the ECOWAS, national fisheries authorities, to take on the mantle and then do rather detailed studies for each country, because we still believe that the results will be remarkable if we focus more. And it's exciting to also know that you are interested in such research, because that is what we do at the University of Cape Coast, and we intend to continue doing research on women's shell fisheries.
Wonderful, thank you. And Ernest, just quickly, I had a question. So what are some of the working ideas about why women are mostly participating in this shellfish sector? Is it that, but I wanted to ask in terms of like, is it a high value sector that men could also participate, or the value is low and then hence it attracts women? So what's happening there? Why are women mostly in it rather than men?
Yes, I mean, this is a very interesting question. Honestly, the point is men have already sort of carved their niche in the marine fishery sector, and even within the estuarine areas. And the thing about these shell fisheries is that it happens within the shallow reaches of the mangrove and estuarine areas. So it sort of gives these women a niche on their own to target these species that are not usually mobile, because the oysters, the periwinkles, the gastropods, these are slow-moving animals. Some of them are either attached to mangrove roots or to rocks on the bottom. And so women do not necessarily have to use the same amount of effort men will have to use in harvesting pelagic fishes and all of that. Also, these areas are very accessible to these women, very shallow areas. They don't need to, they can walk through or wade through the water, pick them with their hands from the bottom into their basins, and then take them onshore for whatever they want. Either they want to sell it or eat it at home. So I think accessibility is one, and also the low-end technologies that are used. They don't need anything much, maybe sometimes only a hatchet or just go with their bare hands. And those are some of the ideas that we think we want to carry forward, as in improving the working apparel that they use will be a very essential thing to do in enhancing the sector. So these are some of the ideas contributing to women specializing in this particular fishery.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure hearing all the wonderful work that is being done. And like the title of our session said, pushing gender, we just wanted to hear what exactly is being done within the continent, and in terms of how do we visualize our contribution towards this work. We are very excited about what we have heard today. We can see the work is different, but it's also similar, and we can see all the possibilities of collaboration. And I hope that people have seen possible collaborations from here. Quickly, I just wanted to say that just a few final announcements, and then because they've granted us a few minutes. So thank you very much, the organizers, for giving us a few minutes. There's going to be a plenary session for leaders in gender equity. I would encourage everybody to attend that plenary session. It is going to be on Wednesday from 15:45 to 17:45, and this is South African Standard Time. So just to hear the general, the wider conversations about gender that have been arranged for at this conference. We are going to be sending out an email. We feel that this work that we have shared here should not just end here. Our conversation should not end here. So we're going to send an email to gauge people's interest in sort of writing a paper out where we can link all of these issues that we are talking about: women, gender, capital, access, or like how can we link them and come up with a publication out of this session, which I feel was a wonderful session. So please be on the lookout for Emma's email. And yeah, I don't know, Emma, do you have anything else to add?
I just want to say thanks again for taking the time to be here with us today. And because of you all, I think this session ended up being very productive, and I learned a lot, and it was just wonderful. So thank you all again.
Yes, if anybody has anything to say, yeah, since probably we have 2 more minutes. If anybody has anything to say, perhaps, yeah, please feel free to unmute and say something.
Right. Am I on mute? Yes, please. I just want to make a comment. You know, there was an earlier comment in the chat that was talking about gender dynamics in small-scale fisheries being complex and context-specific. Well, yes, I agree with context-specific. What I don't maybe agree with so much is it being complex. I think the real issue is that it being ununderstood. Because if we took time to really understand it, I think that there is not much complexity to the gender dynamics in small-scale fisheries. It is clear, if we put our minds to it, that women are focusing in a certain trade that we need to collect data on, and it is with that data that we can really manage it. Without the data, we cannot manage it. So we have to set our minds clear and deviate from the gender idiosyncrasies, and then just focus and do it. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Now, please, we'll keep in touch. Please feel free to respond to our emails, and we look forward to meeting you in other conferences in other parts of the world. So, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.